If you were alive in 1952, you remember what it felt like to watch Kirk Douglas on screen, the way his presence filled every inch of the frame. He was Hollywood's warrior, the man who made strength look effortless. But on one afternoon in a cramped casting office, Kirk Douglas met the only person who could make him question everything he knew about his craft. Marlon Brando had just exploded onto the scene with a streetcar named Desire, playing broken masculinity with such raw honesty that audiences didn't know whether to applaud or look away. Now a director had orchestrated something unprecedented. He put both actors in the same room and asked them to show him rage. Together, watching each other. And what unfolded in those 10 minutes became the secret every serious actor in Hollywood would whisper about for generations. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this deep dive into Hollywood's hidden moments, consider subscribing to see more untold stories from the golden age of cinema. Elia Kazan had been thinking about this experiment for months, ever since he watched Kirk Douglas command a soundstage with a kind of classical precision that reminded him of John Barrymore, and then watched Marlon Brando dismantle every rule of performance Kazan thought he understood. The question kept him awake at night. Could two opposing philosophies of acting coexist, or would one inevitably prove superior to the other? He had seen the future in Brando's work, the way younger actors were already trying to imitate that raw psychological availability. But he also recognized the power in Kirk's approach, the reliability and clarity that made Hollywood function as an industry rather than just an art form. So he devised this audition, knowing full well he would cast neither man, knowing his real purpose was to force a confrontation between two different centuries of performance tradition and see what truth emerged from the collision. The casting office sat on the third floor of a building on Sunset Boulevard. Kirk Douglas arrived at 2 in the afternoon, exactly on time, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. At 35, Kirk had climbed from poverty in upstate New York, where his birth name, Isser Danilovich, meant nothing, to become one of the most bankable stars in the industry. His performances in Champion and the Bad and the Beautiful had proven he could carry a film on sheer intensity alone. Director Elia Kazan sat behind a scarred wooden desk, his fingers drumming an irregular rhythm. Kazan had directed Brando in Streetcar, had helped create the phenomenon now threatening to redefine American acting. He looked at Kirk with an expression between respect and scientific curiosity, as if about to conduct an experiment with unpredictable results. Kirk settled into the chair, his posture perfect, energy controlled but ready to explode. But this felt different when the door opened 15 minutes later and Marlon Brando walked in. Brando moved like someone who had just woken up, his white t-shirt wrinkled, his jeans worn. He was 28 and already considered dangerous by studio executives. Brando looked at Kirk without smiling, without the usual Hollywood pleasantries, and sat down with a heaviness that seemed to pull all the air in the room toward him. Kirk felt genuine uncertainty. Brando represented something Kirk couldn't calculate. It wasn't just talent. It was a complete rejection of everything Hollywood had taught actors to value. Brando didn't care about projecting to the back row or hitting marks or theatrical precision. He cared about something internal and messy and uncomfortably real. Kazan let the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. "I'm not interested in separate auditions," he said. "I want to see what happens when you're both here, both doing the same thing, both aware the other is watching." The character we're talking about lives with rage. Not the kind you show in barroom fights. The kind that sits in your chest and poisons everything it touches. He paused. "I want each of you to show me that rage. You have this room. You have each other. Kirk, you're first." Kirk stood up, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline. He thought about rage, about years of hunger in Amsterdam, New York, about watching his father come home exhausted from the junkyard. He let that fuel build inside him until he could feel it radiating outward. Then he moved, sudden and explosive, grabbing Kazan's desk and shoving it sideways with enough force to make everything rattle. Papers scattered. A coffee cup tipped over. Kirk's voice came out raw and huge. "Rage isn't something you hide," he said. "It's something you use, or it uses you. The display lasted maybe 20 seconds, but changed the air in the room. Kirk's breathing was heavy, his muscles coiled, his eyes blazing. He had given Kazan exactly what 30 years of theater and film had taught him. A performance that was big and clear and impossible to ignore. And for a moment, Kirk felt certain he had won. Then Kazan turned to Brando and said simply, "Your turn." Brando had watched Kirk's entire performance without moving, his face carefully neutral, but inside something was happening that he wouldn't be able to articulate for years. He felt a complicated mixture of admiration for Kirk's technical mastery and something darker. Maybe pity, maybe frustration that this was what Hollywood celebrated and rewarded. Kirk had shown them anger the way a skilled painter might render a storm. Every brushstroke deliberate and effective. It was impressive. It was also, Brando believed, fundamentally about control rather than truth. The rage Kirk performed was rage shaped into something audiences could consume comfortably. Rage with edges smoothed down and a clear beginning and end. Real rage, the kind Brando had lived with since childhood, didn't work that way. It didn't announce itself or follow a dramatic arc. It lived in your body like a disease, invisible until the moment it erupted in ways you couldn't predict or contain. Brando didn't stand up immediately. He sat there, his body relaxed in a way that seemed almost contemptuous of Kirk's display. The silence felt different now, heavier. Kirk found himself sitting back down, watching this younger actor who seemed to be playing by entirely different rules. A minute passed. Kazan didn't rush him. When Brando finally moved, it was so small Kirk almost missed it. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. His eyes closed for just a moment, then opened with something different behind them. Something that looked like genuine pain. His breathing changed, became shallower, faster. His hands began to shake slightly, not with theatrical intention, but with what looked like real emotional distress. And when he spoke, his voice was so quiet Kirk had to lean forward to hear it. "That's not rage," Brando said, the words sounding torn out of him. "That's what we show people, so they'll leave us alone. Real rage is what happens when you can't show it. When you have to swallow it every day until it becomes part of your blood." His hands were still shaking. He stood slowly and walked to the wall, pressing his forehead against it. His shoulders were trembling, his whole body engaged in something that looked less like performance and more like genuine psychological crisis. It's every single moment you can't fight back, and the poison just builds until you don't know if you're a person or just a container for everything you can't express. The room felt like it was shrinking. Kirk felt something unfamiliar, not jealousy exactly, but disturbed recognition that what he was watching was fundamentally different. Brando wasn't performing rage the way Kirk had learned to perform it. He was accessing something real inside himself and letting it exist without shaping it or controlling it. It was messy and uncomfortable and absolutely riveting. Brando finally pushed himself away from the wall, his breathing gradually returning to normal. He sat back down, looking exhausted. Then he looked directly at Kirk for the first time, and something passed between them. Not hostility, but shocked mutual recognition. Kazan stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at Sunset Boulevard for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he turned around, and the expression on his face was something neither actor expected. Not satisfaction, but something closer to sadness. "That was remarkable," Kazan said. "Both of you." And that's exactly the problem. He walked back to his desk. "Kirk, what you showed me is what I've been watching in movies my entire life. It's powerful. It's clear. An audience would understand exactly what they were seeing. Marlon, what you show me is something that might destroy you if you're not careful. You don't perform emotion, you experience it, and that's dangerous. But it's also the most honest thing I've seen in 20 years of making pictures." He sat down heavily. "This role needs something that's somehow both of what you just showed me. It needs Kirk's clarity and Marlon's honesty. And I don't think either of you can give me that alone." Kirk felt anger rising. "So what are you saying? That you're not casting either of us?" Kazan shook his head. "I'm saying you both just taught me something about the future of American acting. The role? I'm going to give it to someone else entirely." They walked out together, neither speaking. The California sun hit them with its usual brightness. But something had shifted. Kirk had spent his career believing acting was about control. Watching Brando, he had seen what happened when you gave up control and let something raw exist in the space between performer and witness. They stood on the sidewalk, neither ready to walk away. "That was brutal," Kirk finally said. Brando nodded. "Yeah, but also kind of necessary. Maybe you really feel all that?" Kirk asked. "Every time." Brando's laugh was short. "That's the problem. I don't know how to do it any other way. In your way, that control, I don't know how you access it without feeling like you're lying." The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but would echo through both careers for decades. By the time they shook hands and walked in opposite directions, something had changed. Not friendship, but respect that only comes from having someone challenge your fundamental assumptions. Neither got that role. It went to a forgotten journeyman actor, and the film disappeared within 6 weeks. But what happened in that casting office became the secret origin story of modern American acting. The moment when two different philosophies collided and neither could claim complete victory. Kirk Douglas continued building his career on intensity and control in Spartacus and Paths of Glory. But sometimes he would think about that audition and wonder if there was something deeper his technique wouldn't let him reach. Brando became the face of method acting, setting new standards in On the Waterfront and The Godfather. But the emotional availability that made his work transcendent also made him vulnerable to exhaustion. And sometimes he would remember Kirk shoving that desk and wonder if there was value in the control he had rejected. The truth neither fully acknowledged was that Kazan had been correct. The future would need both approaches. The best actors of the next generation would somehow combine Kirk's technical control with Brando's emotional availability. But in 1952, they represented 2 centuries of theatrical tradition colliding at high speed. Years later, someone asked Kirk Douglas if he had regrets about roles he didn't get. "There's this audition once," he said slowly, "where I learned that being good at something isn't the same as understanding it completely. I showed them what I knew, and it was impressive. But this other actor showed them something I didn't know existed. That's the real role, the one that changes you even when you don't get cast." Brando, in a rare interview, responded with characteristic opacity. "Kirk Douglas, strong actor, different philosophy than mine. We did this thing once where we showed 2 completely different things, and I think we both realized maybe there isn't one right way to do this impossible thing. Maybe that's the point, finding your own way and respecting that other people's ways are just as valid." The casting office was demolished in 1967. The desk Kirk shoved is long gone. But the story survived, passed down through generations, growing slightly more mythical with each retelling. The people who were there knew the truth, that for 10 minutes, 2 of the greatest actors of the 20th century revealed themselves completely, not just as performers, but as human beings with different ideas about what art demands and what truth costs. Not a competition with a clear winner. Just 2 men, 1 room, and the uncomfortable realization that excellence comes in forms too different to compare, too valuable to dismiss, and too human to judge.